So if you've used a website in the last 5 or so years, you've probably, and purchased something, you've probably come across a checkout that looks something like this, right? So in my class in person, nod your head if you've seen a checkout that kind of looks like this, and pretty much everyone's nodding their head. And so this is what we're going to learn to build today. This is a online payment platform called Stripe, and Stripe has really stepped onto the scene to accept payments and enable e-commerce on websites much more developer friendly than in the past. And so Stripe was actually kind of founded in 2011, and just in that short amount of time, so here we are in 2024, it's been 13 years, and you could see there are almost 2 million websites that use Stripe, and more than 100 companies that process over $1 billion each on Stripe. So millions of websites use Stripe, some really big companies that use Stripe. They make a ton of money, and it's really, burst onto the scene in the last couple of years to take market share from kind of the incumbent, the big player in the space that's been around since the 90s was PayPal. Okay, so PayPal used to be and still is the king in the space. If you look at the space, PayPal and Stripe are kind of 1 and 2. PayPal still is the dominating factor, again being the incumbent. But then you've got the new startup business that's much more developer friendly on the scene. And so we're going to learn Stripe, just realizing PayPal is a competitor. And I like to use PayPal stock. You could see here just a couple of years ago, PayPal stock was at $300, and if you kind of fast forward to today, it's kind of not as low as it used to be. It's about $80, but call that it's been chopped in a third. And the reason being, it's companies like Stripe that are kind of innovating and causing change and taking market share from the big player. Some other players in the game would be Square. You guys have probably heard of Square. The thing that's really cool about being in St. Louis is that one of the Square's founders, his name is Jim McKevely. Jim McKevely is a St. Louis native, and he's a big player, a CEO in Square. I don't think Jack Dorsey is a St. Louis native, but Jim McKevely is. So this is just another kind of on par with Stripe, although it's not quite as popular in the online payments. But what Square's a little bit more known for is their point of sale. So if you have a small business and you want a cash register and what are called point of sale systems, and then you got Authorize.net, which is another competitor, which is a Visa solution. So it's really, kind of comes down to Stripe versus PayPal. Again, we're going to learn as a developer, specifically the MERN stack, right? So we're going to learn. We're not going to hit the Mongo database side as much. This is just a very introduction, how to bring this in the MERN stack. We're not going to necessarily bring in Mongo, but we are going to bring in Express, React, and Node. Okay, so 3 out of the 4 components in the MERN stack. So we're going to take this payment, and what I can kind of demo here is I can mock up a payment real quick, and a dummy credit card and a dummy expiration date, which would be any date in the future. Dummy CVC code, put my name on here, and a dummy zip. So we can kind of put some dummy information here, and we can click on pay. We don't need to save this, and get redirected kind of just to a dummy success page. And if I were to log into my Stripe.com dashboard, which by the way, this is kind of the first step, is to make an account on Stripe.com. So if you want to follow this example, go ahead and go to Stripe.com and make an account. Once you make an account, you will see here, but you could see that I've made $13, which is basically 2 transactions today. And so you can see this was accepted on the back end by Stripe, that the payment was in fact accepted. And you're seeing that I'm in a test mode, which we'll be using. So that's what we're going to build. Again, this is a very minimal get started with Stripe and the MERN stack. So as I will get started, again, if you want to code along, this is going to be MERN Stripe. I'll just make an empty folder, and we're going to get started from scratch. Opening that up in Visual Studio Code. Now, really the only prerequisite on your machine is that you will want to have Node installed, and so you're going to go to Node.js. Now, all my class, you guys have obviously already downloaded and installed Node, but go ahead and download and install the LTS version of Node, and that's really the only prerequisite software. And then I will be using VS Code, so you'll need to be familiar with VS Code and maybe some fundamentals of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, to get this started, as we do in Node environments, we're going to run the npm init. By the way, node-v will tell me what version of Node I'm running. If you don't get that to respond with a version of Node, you're going to need to download and install Node. But if I do npm init, that'll kind of get my package JSON brought in. Defaults here: MERN Stripe version 1, a demo project for Stripe. Entry point is going to be an index.js file. Leave that empty, leave that empty. Keywords are empty. Author, put my name. And MIT license is open source. Yes, this is okay. And that generates my package.json. Now, I personally like using the module system, so I'm going to change the type to module. And let me zoom in on my code here. And this will allow me to use the import systems, the import and export modules instead of the common JS modules. So I want to change that. Now I want to bring in Express. So I got to install some dependencies, including Express. And so if I kind of look at what I'm bringing in, I'm going to bring in Stripe on my back end as well. So here is the Stripe dependency that I'm going to bring in that I can use in Node. So you can see npm iStripe, and of course I'm going to bring in Express as well. So Express and Stripe, I'll bring both of those in. While I'm at it, because I'm working with a front end and a back end that are going to be on different ports, I'm going to bring in cores. That's just going to enable my back end to talk to my front end without getting some cross-origin scripting errors. So I'm going to bring in cores. And I said my file is an index.js. That's going to kind of be the default file that we defined in our package JSON. And I personally like to go to Express.js.com and get the hello world. So I want to go to getting started hello world. I'm just going to bring those in right here, but I'm using imports instead. So I'm going to import Express from Express. And then I'm going to paste the rest of my hello world. And then I have a script that I will run So I have to create a script. Now, in Node, I'm just going to call this my dev script. And I'm going to use NodeMon. So I have NodeMon already installed. You will want to install, if you've never installed NodeMon, go ahead and install NodeMon, npm I NodeMon, and actually install it globally. So npm install -g NodeMon to install that globally. I've already installed NodeMon, which will allow me to run this NodeMon command. And I'm going to load my env file called .env, and I'm going to run index.js. All right, so this is a newer, built into a newer version of Node where you can just load the env files as such, and you don't actually have to install the .env dependency on the back end. So I will make a .env file, and we're going to put one variable in there because you're supposed to put your API keys in a .env. Nonetheless, if I run my npm run dev script, it doesn't like it because I'm actually running on port 3000 already. So yours probably works just fine. I'm going to change that to 3001. And you can see that kind of gets that booted up on 3001. And I'll just make this a clickable HTTP. So let's make a variable here. HTTP // localhost : port. So now you can hold down and follow the link, and it responds with hello world. So that's just an Express app. Obviously the E inside of MERN. But we haven't done much with Stripe yet. And so to use Stripe, let's kind of go here. Now, make a Stripe account, step 1. Step 2, once you're logged into Stripe, you'll need to make essentially a business account. Okay, now I've got 2 business accounts. I've got one here. I'm a race director for a 5K, so this is a live Stripe dashboard. And if you kind of rewind time, we've taken a bunch of money over the years on this Stripe dashboard. You're not going to see anything lately because the 5K was in the spring. Okay, so that's kind of a live one for me. And I've got this other one that I made for work. Right, so you're going to need to make a business account. And so whatever product that you're going to sell for whatever business, you need to, make that business account. You're going to once you have that business account, they're going to tie it in to your bank so that your deposits that go to stripe.com will then be deposited to your bank. Okay, so you need to make a business account. And once you've made a business account, we're in development mode, right? And so there's essentially a switch here to switch from development mode to test mode. I can kind of show you that switch on my Lawday account, that if you want to be in test mode or if you want to actually be more in a production mode. Okay, so since we're in development mode, we need to be in test mode. And then when you're actually ready to go live, you're gonna switch that off and do this on real products and do this on obviously in production. Okay, but since we are not in production at the moment, we're just learning some basics of how to tie this in and how to code this. We're gonna go into test mode, and here's my course. Now, a couple of things here. As I go to my home screen, you see some different potential solutions, which are typically called no-code or low-code options. That's not what we're building. We're learning how to actually code a back end and a front end using the Stripe API. And so we are going to be using the docs right here. I'm also going to point out that there's two keys that we are going to use in this demonstration. There's what's called a publishable key. This is a key for your front end, and there's a secret key. The secret key is for the back end. Okay, so I'm going to view the docs here. And what we're going to do is open up this accept online payments. And if you want to know where I started, like where I got the root of my code, I started using this tutorial. I selected React as my front end, and I selected Node as my back end. And this is where I started. Now, I'm not going to use this verbatim, but you're going to notice here on my server.js, which is kind of like my index, we're doing some imports. We've got one post route that redirects us, and then we listen on a port. Okay, so that's all that really is to the Express app. There's not a whole lot here. We've got one route. Okay, and then if I go to app.js, you're going to notice this is the React that they suggest. Okay, so I will tell you this is where I started with. I did not end here. Okay, so I'm going to kind of customize this a little bit, and they walk you through, you know, installing Stripe. You know, they kind of walk you through what I'm going to walk you through, and like I said, I went ahead and modified a few things. So just to kind of show you this, and you can download the app and get the source code right from their website. However, I've made a few changes. So you will notice that there is a checkout. There is essentially a checkout backend route, and there's also a Stripe import. So here we're kind of bringing in Stripe, and we're configuring it to use that secret key. Okay, so here's how we're going to code that up in our demonstration. So I'm using the import syntax instead of the require. So I'm going to bring in Stripe and cores, and I need to point my Stripe, capital S, I need to point it at a secret key. Okay, so notice on line 8, I'm wiring up a variable called Stripe. I'm calling the Stripe constructor, and I'm passing it from my process. I'm passing a variable from my .env called Stripe secret key. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up my .env file. This is the name of my key, equals. Now, secret keys are kind of like your passwords. These are not something that I should be sharing with any of you, especially the open internet. Okay, so I need to get my secret key, and I showed you where to get it. Right here, I'm going to pull this off screen. I'm going to copy this secret key. I'm going to paste it into my .env. I'm not going to put any quotes here. So I'm going to pull this off screen. I'm going to reveal my secret key. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it. I'm going to save it, close that file. Okay, now this variable has a value that comes from the Stripe dashboard. Okay, again, the secret key is what you use on the back end, and we are now pulling that out of our .env file. Next step is to make our route. So we need to make a backend route with app.post, and I'm just going to call it /checkout. It's an asynchronous method. So let's close that up. And again, you can kind of get a you can kind of get a start here. I got Copilot giving me a suggestion here, which I'm not going to take, but it's pretty similar. Okay, so essentially I got this code, and I'm going to walk through what we're doing here. We're making a variable on line 16 that essentially we're calling a create a Stripe session. So if we kind of walk through this, we're creating a Stripe session. Obviously line 17 says we're taking credit card. Line items. Now this is interesting. This price, I'm going to show you where to get this price. So if I go back to my dashboard, what are we selling? Let's go to our product catalog. You can see in my product catalog, I've added 3 products: vegetarian, pizza, pepperoni, margarita. Okay, these are the 3 products. You can create a product. When you create a product, give it a name, a description, an image, a price. Okay, the billing period is, if you make it a one-off, it's just a solid price, right? So this, whatever the item is, whether it's a reoccurring plan or a one-off plan. Okay. So let's say my vegetarian pizza, what I'm looking for was the price ID. And so if I click on this is the product ID, which is not, the one mistake that I made was I put the product ID right here when I was kind of building this out. Product ID, different than a price ID. So let me find my price ID. It's somewhere on this page, I think. Let me see if I click edit product, if I can find my price ID. Let me click around and find this. Okay, it made sense. I just to get there. So here's my products. I've got 3 products: vegetarian pizza. If you actually click on the price, this is where you get the price ID. The price for the vegetarian pizza. There we go. So that's how we are essentially wiring up what we're selling, is we're putting the price ID of the vegetarian pizza inside of this price property. So there's my price ID for the vegetarian pizza. The quantity is 1. This is just an introduction, right? So you can obviously make this very dynamic. These are just statically coded, what we're selling and the quantity. Obviously, in a shopping cart, you're going to let the user change the quantity and change, what they're buying. This is just a very static, just get this up and running. Okay, so then you can see the mode is a payment. Then we have, if the payment is successful, what happens? If the payment is canceled, what happens? So these are back-end routes that we do not have yet. You're going to notice there's a success and a cancel route on, let's make this port 3001 since that's where this is running. So let's bring in a success route. So that's underneath here. I'm just going to say, hey, if it's a success, just let the user know it's a success. And these are both get, HTTP gets. And if the user clicks cancel, just let them know that they canceled. Again, just for the demo. Okay. So here's our backend checkout link. And next up, we set, I'm going to put this inside of a try catch. Okay, so let's wrap this in a try block. Catch the error, and if there's an error, we're going to console log it. And now we've got a try catch block. And all that's left to do on a successful method call, we return that session object. So I'm going to return res.json. Now, what actually comes back from this method call is a big object. And so this session variable has a lot of data in it. So I'm just going to send that entire session variable to the front end, right? So again, this is a backend route, and we're just going to, this create sends a whole lot of data, and we're just going to send that data to the front end. And so our backend, not too difficult to kind of get that up and running. Don't know what the status is right now. If I were to, let me think about it. If I were to just hit my /checkout, 3001, oh, it's a post, right? So I'm not posting here, I'm just running a get. So we're not able to post to it. Maybe I could boot up Postman, something like that. But this is a post request, so I got to wire up a front end to actually make a post request. The way that I like to wire up a front end, if I go back to my terminal, so I'm going to start up a new terminal. So I've got my back end running. npm create vite at latest. And so this is what I'm going to use to build a React front end. And I typically call this my front end folder, right? Just I know that it's a React front end. So I'm going to use the arrow keys to go down and select React. I'm just going to choose vanilla JavaScript. And then it tells me what to do. It says cd front end. So I hit tab as I'm typing front end. npm I for npm install. So install the front end dependencies. And then we can run our React front end. As that spins. And npm, there's a dev script, run dev. And that boots up a React template right here. Running on localhost 5174. Here's my backend, package.json. Now I've got a front end running React. And so I can begin to code in React. So I'm going to go into my front end. Now the Stripe dependency for the front end, if I go to npm.js and I search for Stripe, for the backend I use this this third. You can see this is Stripe for Node, so this is Stripe for the backend. But if I just search Stripe here, this one, Stripe loading utility, this is what I wound up using for the front end. Now just on a search here, maybe here's another one, React Stripe, but that is not, if I double check myself, what I used. It is not. So here's a front end dependency for Stripe, which we can install. So if I kind of close this, now I need to make sure I'm in the front end directory so that when I install Stripe, it's going into my front end dependencies list and not the back end. All right, now I'm ready to start coding in React. So we got a React component, so I'm going to go in the source folder and I'm going to make a checkout. So inside of source, I'm going to make a component called checkout.jsx. And what I'll do here is I'm going to import load stripe from that dependency that I just installed. And like I said, there's also a public key essentially. Now this one, not so risky because this is on the front end to share. So if I go back to my home, again, what I worked with before was the secret key for the back end, but here's my publishable key. So I'm going to copy my publishable key and I paste that in right here. And that's going to help me load Stripe on the front end. And essentially, because this is a functional component, I'm going to make a function called checkout. And then at the bottom, I'm going to export checkout. And in here, my checkout function is going to return some JSX with a div. And really, the markup is not much. I think I had an H1 that said, buy yourself a veggie pizza. And I had a button on click. We're going to write a function, a JavaScript called handle checkout. It's a little HTML button that says checkout. And all of our logic is going to be right here in the handle checkout function. And what that function looks like, now I can just save it here, and in main JSX, instead of loading app, I'll just load my checkout component. It's going to import it. Import checkout from checkout. That looks correct. Now I'm using my checkout component. If I save that, do an npm run dev, we should now see buy yourself a veggie pizza. And obviously I have not written the logic for this button yet. So that's what's coming up next. So all of this is going to be a try catch. Try this, catch any errors. And again, pulling from the docs is where I kind of get here. I'm going to make a fetch call, right? So my students, you guys, you've been getting used to Axios. Axios and fetch can both do the same kind of thing. Fetch is built into JavaScript. Axios is a dependency. So I'm going to make a call to my backend using fetch. It's an asynchronous function, fetch. And this is correct. So I got localhost 3001. That's my backend. Remember here, this is running on 3001. Slash checkout. This was the post, so slash checkout post. So my method is post, and then you basically say that the way that we're sending data from the front end to the back end, we are sending data in a JSON format. Now, in order to receive that, I want to do one more thing on my app. I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to say app.use cores, and I'm going to say app.use Express.js to receive JSON from the front end. And I didn't have to do this last time, so I don't think this part was mandatory, but this just basically says, hey, I can accept JSON from a front end application. And this says it's okay that it's coming from a different port because this is 3001 on the back end, and we saw our front end is coming from 5174. Okay, it's not happy with its current state. So let's go back into checkout, and I got figure out where my curlies went off. So try, catch, return. I think I'm just missing a curly right there. And back to the front end. Okay, so now we've got this response coming from our back end. So now we get to use this variable. So right here, I'm going to destructure the ID. So there's an ID property. If I can type this correctly, this needs to happen in the try block, so don't write it there. Get my curlies and everything lined up properly. So here's my try. And then here's the response object, ends right there. So that line goes right there. Okay. So fetch the data, destructure this ID from response.json. So here we have a Stripe promise. We await that promise to get the data, right? So here's a promise. We basically resolve that promise to get the data. And then we use this variable to redirect to checkout using the session ID of this ID that we destructured right there. And catch the error. And so that wires up our front end.
I haven't coded anything else.
Again, I messed up my curlies right there. That curly actually needs to end right there. So that finishes off our function. Then we've got our return JSX. And then we got that, and that gets rid of this red squiggly, because now we're calling handle checkout appropriately. So this is the front end code that, again, we're just kind of statically configuring a one item, as far as the quantity goes and what that item is.
Yeah.
And so now we've got our front end up and running. And click checkout. It brings us right to this right screen. And demo@gmail.com. There's a bunch of dummy cards for Stripe. And you can find this in the documentation. But if you kind of see, these are test cards to mock up payments. So if you just want Visa, do all 4 2s. And that should be accepted. And then it says any future date, 12/24, make up a CVC. Click on pay. We get the green check and we redirect to our success route. And if I go back to my transactions, here is our demo purchase, demo@gmail.com, Bob demo, and what they bought and how much they paid. So yeah, so hopefully you found that useful. We got to, wire in Stripe for online payments at what I would call, I wouldn't call that low code necessarily, because where do you take this from here? This is clearly just an introduction, right? We got to start talking about, okay, how do we provide an interface with a bunch of products and allowing users to have a cart, saving those items into a cart session. This is just getting started with one product, like a static buy now button. And that's what you can do now. I mean, just with this, you can buy one product and get that up and running. So hope you guys, hope you enjoyed that.